Good morning. Welcome to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School on February 8, 2020. Our speaker again for the fourth time is Dr. Sigve Tonstad. He's working his way through the book of Revelation on some thematic matters. Today, I believe, is Revelation and the city. Let's pause for prayer. Dear God, again, thank you for this Sabbath school. Thank you for Sigve. My, he's done a lot of excellent work. Help us to benefit from it. In Christ's name,
amen. Thank you, Dave. And am I on sound-wise? Yes. Are we okay? Yeah. So thank you. And so we are continuing our series here, Images in Revelation, somewhat related to my commentary on the book of Revelation. And I just had a letter from the book editor of the Catholic Biblical Quarterly. She had asked if I would review a book on Revelation in the CBQ, Catholic Biblical Quarterly. It's quite an influential theological journal. And there was a little bit of a mix-up, but then she wrote to me and said, "Oh, we are reviewing your book." So, but I have been asked to do reviews for them from time to time, and I will do that. So today is Revelation and the city. Next time is Revelation and the nations. My topic next time is in part in relation to the book of Revelation, where there is an interest in the nations. It is also in honor or in memory of Roy Branson, whose influence is strong in many circles and in this class in particular. His sort of theme phrase was the healing of the nations. So I'm very happy in this context to be able to speak on the subject of the healing of the nations. I might think that, well, there is no topic more important than the healing of the name. But next to the healing of the name, let's do the healing of the nations. These topics, these images relate to each other like this, that the name is the central thing. If we get that right, we have everything will fall into place. But these other outposts, they have to help us get things right in relation to the name. So there is a sort of thematic reciprocity here, and I hope that will be felt to some extent. So, Revelation and the city. Last time we had the surprise that it should end in heaven, but it ends on earth. This time it should end in a garden, but it ends in a city. There is a third surprise, and I had thought of presenting on that today and sort of putting this together, what happens the city, what happens in the city, and what happens outside the city. But there is no space for that, and it is never a good idea to do two topics anyway. One should do only one. So just pedagogically, it's a bad idea. So the third surprise, what happens outside the city, I will not talk about it. And you can read about my view in the commentary and buy 10 copies and give them to your friends and invite them for a discussion at your home at some point. All right, let's read. Let's have a volunteer read the text for today. Can we have the microphones circulating so we get someone to volunteer and read these wonderful, wonderful texts from the ending of the Bible.
And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride, beautified for her husband.
And the second one too.
Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And in the Spirit he carried me away to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God.
Now this is amazing stuff. And so, is there a city at the end? There is a city at the end. It's called the Holy City. The whole city. WHOLE, whole city. The healed city. The city renewed. So it is a city. It is called a new city, and it is called Jerusalem, and obviously that also matters. Everything matters. There is a city, a new city, but the new city is an old city because it's called Jerusalem. So there is some continuity with cities of the past. And then the city is called the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And there is some sense of excitement toward the end of the book as John gets to these things. I saw. It is a little like the pace quickens and the excitement builds, like it does at the end of a symphony or something like that. I think Revelation should be heard symphonically, and not just the people who take this book apart and do not allow it to play itself out symphonically, do grave injustice to the book. It sort of diminishes it, it compromises it, and worse than that is that there is a certain poetics in this book, and it has fallen victim to all kinds of people who only think in prose. You cannot do Revelation in prose. You have to do some of this in poetry, and you have to do it with music. Now, this is a little bit on the side, but let me just admit it. So I am a member of the University Church here, even though I commute back and forth, and so I would like the church of which I'm a member, I would like it to do a church service based on the text of Revelation 4:1-8:1, the scene in the heavenly council, where there is a book that no one can open, break the seals, then something happens, he opens the seals, and there is a tremendous impact at the end. When the Lamb broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. I would like a church, a big church, an institutional big church with musical resources, audience participation, choirs, everything all sort of mobilized and pulled, all the stops pulled to perform that passage in the book of Revelation. I have let my wishes be known in that regard to the leadership of the church of which I am a member. And I am now soliciting membership participation in making this happen. That is to say, to taste once, at least, once in an Adventist community, in a significant Adventist community, to taste only once the symphonic character of this book, and not just this, when this book fell victim to readers who think in terms of chemistry and only in prose and cannot see, the sort of musical score here. So that was an aside. So there are some things that, a combination of things expected and unexpected as we get to the end. Now, in terms of the reading tradition, in terms of the theological tradition, everything in the ending is unexpected. So it is unexpected that we end on the earth because the theological tradition ends in heaven. It is unexpected that there is a city, although maybe heaven is a sort of, there could be in the theological tradition a notion of a city in heaven, I suppose. But I am saying that it should not be unexpected that it ends on the earth. Maybe it should not be unexpected that it ends in a city either. We'll see. That it ends with people, that is very, also I put that in the category of expected. That it ends with a bride, that is unexpected. That is not, that is a new horizon, that the city is bright, that there is a kind of a nuptial wedding texture to what happens at the end. I will put that in the category of the unexpected, although the New Testament in Johannine literature has given us a sort of advance warning of a wedding, of a bride thing. So let us have someone from this side read John 3:29. It's John the Baptist talking about the impact and the sort of relation of Jesus to people. Please.
He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. For this reason, my joy has been fulfilled. John 3:29.
So, who is the bridegroom here? Yeah, it's Jesus, and there is a bride. So there is that notion of John the Baptist. He is just a friend of the bridegroom, and he is not the bridegroom. But there is one, and so on. Let's read this one too, then, from the most extensive description of the wedding or the bride image in Revelation. Could you read that one too?
Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready.
Yes. So is there a wedding at the end? Is there a bridegroom? Is there a bride? That's the image. And this, of course, all images we use in Revelation and otherwise, they do in some ways count on prior use to define the content. You hear bride, you have certain associations. You hear wedding, you have certain associations, right? That's inevitable. That is really how language works. That's how the established meanings, prior meanings, sometimes new meanings, but you have to start from something. So here we start from something, and we think wedding is a happy occasion. We think bridegroom, this is as good as it gets. And I am not going to succumb to the temptation to explicate fully this phrase, but it must mean something. His bride has made herself ready. Anyway, think about it. Okay, I'm changing gears now to interact a little with a French reader of biblical material. His name was Jacques Ellul. He died in 1994. He was not a theologian, he was a sociologist. He lived in the city of Bordeaux, and I think he spent most of his life in Bordeaux. He has written extensively on sociological topics. His books have been textbooks in French universities. He was also an active, more in a sort of French Protestant contact, and there isn't much French Protestant, there isn't that much church life in France, period. But he was in some ways in the Protestant context and influenced somewhat by the German theologian Karl Barth, I am also made aware of. And I have several books by Jacques Ellul. I have his book on the Apocalypse, which is not a commentary, it is a sort of idea book about things in Revelation, and I consider it one of the most valuable books written on Revelation, Apocalypse. It exists in English. And another book he has written that I read many years ago, long before I sort of got into academic study of the New Testament. I read his book, The Meaning of the City, which I also consider to be a pivotal book, just rich with ideas and also made better by his knowledge of biblical perspectives. So here is Jacques Ellul, and I can read this one. What does the fact, so there is a city in the end, what does the fact that it is a city essentially mean? We are in the presence of a series of meanings. The first is that we observe a contrast between the first creation and the second. In the first, God had created a garden for man. Man lives in nature. In the second, he is installed in the city. So Elul sees this as a contrast. Now there are some other readers who say that it isn't a contrast. It was always the purpose that there should be a city. So the city is rudimentary, sort of, what should I say? There is a sort of blueprint, a city blueprint, even from the beginning, even from God's side. But that is not as easy to show as what Elul shows, namely the contrast. And so it began in the garden, did it? Did it begin in a garden? Yeah. And does it end in a city? Yeah. It ends in a city. So let's keep it in those images. Now how does that work? How does that work generally? How does it work for Seventh-day Adventists? You love country living. Sure. You know, we love country living. Adventists do not like cities. Is that fair to say? No. That the city has a bad name in Adventism? We must leave the city. You know, we must get out in the country. And there is just a lot of variations of that theme, you know, leaving the city, leaving. So here we are, so here the shape of the story generally challenges us, and it challenges the sort of Adventist paradigm even more, because we're supposed to leave the city and live in the country. You know, and I come from a country where we have a city, we have Oslo, we have 600,000 people in Oslo, but it doesn't amount to very much. But Norwegians who live in Oslo, they come from other places in the country. And the ideal in Norway is to live in a house where you cannot see another house. You cannot see the lights from another house. You are out there in nature. That's one of the reasons why Norway is not a member of the EU. It ought to be a member of the EU. I'm embarrassed to give show my colors in that regard. But you know, you cannot join there when your ideal is rural living and not be interfered with, and you just have anxiety attacks when you meet someone walking on a train out there. And they're getting crowded, and so on. So here we are challenged, because the ideal here and the sort of consummation, the completion of the journey is a city and all what that could mean. So let's read these scriptures. Let's have someone else volunteer here. Now we are looking at the genealogy of the city. Who were the first city builders? What is the sort of reputation, the sort of foundation for the making of cities in biblical thought? Thank you.
Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city and named it Enoch after his son Enoch.
Well, it doesn't get worse than that. Doesn't it? I mean, it cannot get worse than that. So here is who is the first city builder? He is the first murderer too, and he was, he is someone who was cultivating the land, and now he is building a city. And so we could speculate, we could interact. Does anyone want to comment on that? That Cain is the first city builder? You understand why? What is it? Anyway, it's not the best recommendation for the city. Sort of, the roots of it. So let's read the other one, because we need to move forward here. Let's read this one.
Nimrod was the first on earth to become a mighty warrior. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, and Akkad. all of them in the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ur, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city.
But you would be hard pressed in America, well, let's say 20, 30 years ago, to find anyone who knows anything about this part of the world. But it is not hard to find people now who know, because thousands and thousands of American soldiers have been in this country. The city next to Nineveh is called what? What's the modern city next to the old city of, it's the city of Mosul. Probably the most damaged city in the Middle East now after these decades of war in that part of the world. So Nimrod, is there a city named Nimrod in the ancient world? Very big city. Has any one of you been to Nimrod? You haven't? No, I have. I have, it's there. Nineveh, anyone been to Nineveh? You've been to Nineveh, that's amazing. Because it isn't that easy to get there. It was not a problem in the days of Saddam Hussein, that's when I was there. And I traveled all by myself to Nimrod and Nineveh and saw these places. And now it's harder to see them and harder to, not as much to see, because what remains of these cities have been more damaged. But Cain is the first city builder. Nimrod is the second one. And neither of these characters come out looking very good in biblical terms. You have a bad start. The city is off to a bad start, isn't it? That's what I'm trying to show. Let's read these two texts. Let's have someone else read them. Pass the microphone, please. Or go ahead. Yeah.
Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon.
That's Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, go ahead.
And the king said, "Is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal capital by my mighty power and for my glorious majesty?"
So, with the text we had on the previous slide, showing Cain, showing Nimrod, now showing Babylon after the flood, now showing Babylon in the Neo-Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar, what do we see? We see characters known for violence. We see conquest. We see domination, sort of imperial aspirations. We see that. That's the character of the city. That is in some ways the essence of it. We see claims to autonomy. Let's make a name for ourselves and so on. We see a certain type of self-sufficiency. We see tendency to rebellion. And you can add some other words too. You want to add other words to sort of make the list longer? Are you in agreement that these are in some ways representative for what the city is then in biblical thought? So here is what Jacques Ellul says about it in his book, The Meaning of the City. But all the cities he constructed, he is human beings, man. All the cities he constructed were marked with the same stamp, power. That's what the character of the city was, and aspirations, and in some ways building power by means of violence. So all these images, all these world powers you see in the book of Daniel are powers that have, are countries or empires that have power as their characteristic. The life of a powerful city is but a constant succession of revolts against God. There is a kind of theological texture to it too. And yes, we have, you are studying the book of Daniel here after our session, aren't you? You're going through the text, and I think that's an excellent sort of, what should I say, overlapping interest here, certainly today. So here there is a kind of theological texture to these powers, and they are not playing, on the right side of the field with God. So, and he also says that this is just in character with the city that it evolved that way. This is a picture from Cairo, and it is. I have taken this picture from the internet, but I have taken similar pictures myself with my own camera from the 30th floor or so, 25th, 30th floor on the island of Zamalek in Cairo, in the central part of Cairo, because our youngest daughter, she was stationed in Cairo in the Norwegian Foreign Service, and I looked out, and it was always very polluted. It's one of the most polluted cities in the world. It is actually quite uninhabitable. I like to go running. I went running in the morning. I inhaled diesel fumes like crazy. Later in the day it was completely impossible. So, and here in the background, I think we are supposed to see the pyramids. At least from her apartment, we could see faintly, never clearly, the pyramids. Man had never succeeded. That's the other side of the city. Yes, there is violence on one side, and there is failure. It did not work. So that's the other problem. Man had never succeeded. He had always experienced failure. And the actual urban monstrosity is testimony to this. Thus, that which had been, and this is the contrast, and now he is sort of redeeming. Now he is telling us why there is a city at the end of the story. So, human beings tried and tried and tried, couldn't get it to work, but there is a city at the end. The holy city, the whole city, the New Jerusalem. There is a city in the end. Thus, that which had been the historic failure of man becomes the triumphant success. There is finally communion. There is finally assembly, and not only of one generation, but of all. You see what he is saying here? He is saying that God takes a symbol of rebellion. He takes what is the sort of trademark of Cain, the violent person, and the rebellious person, and the person who will say, who is my brother? Or am I my brother's keeper? The person who sort of swears by autonomy, independence of other people. And here God redeems that failure, as it were, and puts it all together in the city. I think this is an underdeveloped project theologically, also from me. So I wish to develop it more, but it certainly belongs as one of the key images in the book of Revelation at the ending. There is a city. That's what there is. I just threw this one in. It's just amazing that the world is able to do what it does in our time. It's just amazing that you can get water in your kitchen in a city of 37 million people in Japan, in Tokyo, Yokohama. Some of you have been there, I have not been there, but that is considered the largest urban concentration, metropolitan area in the world. It isn't quite successful in Delhi, I have been told. I cannot speak for these other cities. I have been to Cairo. That's the biggest one I have seen. The other ones I haven't seen. And these cities are just unfathomably huge, and they are in some ways, they are examples, amazing examples of human ingenuity, aren't they? Can't you admire the city just a little bit? Can't we say it is quite amazing that you can, the traffic, the trains, the water, the garbage, pickup, all these things that people are doing, the artwork, the symphonies, can't you say this is amazing? It's quite an accomplishment. And then we also have to say, there must be something that is even better. This is not completely successful. There is an accomplishment here. There is also some signs of failure. Can we say that? You know. So I want to be not totally critical of the city, because in the end we're going to have to get used to it. Well, the person who gets to read these verses will have to place $100 in the offering for the privilege of getting to read them. Any volunteers for that? Thank
Sorry,
you.
I don't think I have $100, but I'll have a go at it.
I'll share it with you.
50-50.
$50 for me.
It has the glory of God and a radiance like a very rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. It has a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates are inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of the Israelites. And the wall of the city has 12 foundations, and on them are the 12 names of the 12 apostles and of the Lamb. The city lies four square. Sorry about the microphone. The city lies four square, and its length the same as its width. And he has measured the city with his rod. 1,500 miles. Its length and width and height are equal. The wall is built of jasper, while the city is pure gold, clear as glass.
Thank you. I have put as headline for this slide, theological architecture, you know, because normal architecture would not make cities like this, you know, this, it's square, it is as high as it is wide, you know, it reaches from Los Angeles to Portland, Oregon, you know, and then equally as high, you know, this is not, you know, any normal city. But you can also feel that the writer is scraping the bottom of the barrel for the right words. He cannot get the vocabulary. He wants an even better word. You know, it is like the language in some ways fails him. Can you sense that? You know, all these beautiful things. He's trying to describe something beautiful, something where there is a kind of surplus of everything. Can you see that? And in my commentary, just as an aside, I make a point that the way the world is represented at the end, from the point of view of surplus and abundance, shows how unreasonable it was of the serpent in the beginning to create the impression that there was something in the world God had created that was deficient. It is not easy to make a case for deficiency at the end. You see that? You know, it was contrived to make the case for a defect or a deficiency in the beginning. And the very representation of the world at the end is in some ways showing the success or the success of God's story and the unreasonableness of the other. So let's see. So just a couple more things here. See, the book talks about uses this image all the time: clear as crystal, clear as glass. It loves those images. It has to use them over and over. And so here I try to put some things together. So the symbol here is the city, and there is the bride, and then there are walls and gates, and there are foundations. And the primary meaning, the sort of easiest meaning to get out of this is people. This is a city of people. There is a person who used to teach at Westmont College here in California, Robert Gundry, whose daughter, Judy Gundry, who is a Yale professor, has been a visitor on our campus and talked to us here at Loma. But he has written a seminal essay called about the New Jerusalem as a city of people. So people for the city, people for bride. inevitably. Wall and gates, it's people again. And foundation, all people. This is an aside, but I will, and this is what is said in this room, stays in this room. I think Loma Linda is quite a successful institution when it comes to hardware. I don't think Loma Linda is quite as successful when it comes to software. The software of life is people. You know, prioritizing people, and the way people is the sort of melody of this new world. People, you know, the quality, the interest in people. The buildings are buildings, but they are more than buildings, they are people. And when, I think Elil might actually make that point, or somebody makes it, or at least I try to make it in my commentary, that what you have in the end, on the walls and the gates, 12 tribes of the sons of Israel, isn't just that you have, oh, you know, there is a sign there, one curly, Damaso, what's this building called? Doesn't it have a name? Has it someone? Yeah, but someone has to be named. That donor hasn't come forward yet. We don't have a name yet. But the names, the meaning here, when you have the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel, doesn't mean that you have a plaque there with the name of Reuben and Simeon on all those people. It means that you have Reuben and Simeon and Judah and the whole. They are there. Those people are there. It isn't just, you hear me, the plaque. And the 12 apostles, it's not just that there are some signs here saying, well, you know, the 12 apostles. Jesus Christ spent a long night in prayer before he chose those people. And at the end, and you go there, you meet Peter and James and John. You follow me? It isn't just a plaque, an inscription. It is the actual people. That's how I think you should look at it. That is what seems to be redeemed. And let's read a little more. We're doing fine for time. You can interrupt me, say something, protest, cheer.
I saw it.
Let's see who has. Yeah, thank you.
I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. The gates will never be shut by day. There will be no night there.
Well, he just, piles it on, doesn't he? So in medicine, there is a concept called pertinent negatives. It's quite an important concept in medicine. You do a medical workup, and you say someone comes in with, shortness of breath, and then you start asking the person, well, when do you have shortness of breath? And the person says, well, help me. There are some doctors here. So you have shortness of breath with activity. And the person says, no, I don't have that. You have shortness of breath when you lie down. No, I don't have that. You have shortness of breath when you wake up with shortness of breath suddenly in the middle of the night, and the person says, no, you don't have that. So what, can you rule out something now? You can use these. Are they pertinent negatives? Relevant to the problem you're trying to figure out? Someone who has shortness of breath, that person most likely does not have heart failure, and most likely does not have congestive heart failure. Harvey Elder says yes, because even if he's a specialist in infectious disease, he knows that that is a very basic thing in medicine. So the concept of pertinent negatives is a very useful concept in order to nail things down. Now we have a negative here, a pertinent negative, we should say, don't we? There should be a temple in the city. because all cities have temples, and someone who has written a book about the city says that the essential element in the city, the sort of a generative element for the city was actually the temple. And the Jerusalem temple built by Herod in the time of Christ was an extremely beautiful building that made people feel it was exciting to go up to Jerusalem and just see this wonderful building. If you hadn't seen that building, you hadn't seen anything. You know, it was a big attraction to have the temple in the city. And so with other cities, and you can go to cities like Florence and see the Duomo and see that is the dominant building, or you can go to Toledo, as we did a year ago or so, and see the amazing church in Toledo. You know, temples that define the city. And now there is no temple in this city. And what does that mean? It means a mediated presence, doesn't it? That the temples in some ways mediated the divine presence. In some ways it gave us access to it. In some ways it veiled it. Are both?
It's like a sanctuary.
Yes. But there is, you see, so the temple mediates God's presence, the temple also veils it. You know, so it's an imperfect representation. Yes, please.
God is the attraction.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it means. And the fact that God is the temple is the Lord God and the Almighty, and that means that now there is unmediated access. Isn't that true? So this is a pertinent negative in a big way.
Sigve,
Yeah.
I want to say something about that. I grew up in a city that had mosques and temples and synagogues and whatnot. And I think if there is no temple, wait a minute. People are free to hang out with each other. When there is a Jewish temple, the Christians don't go in there, and then when there's a church, Jews don't go in there. But if there is no temple, there is no division.
Yeah.
I like that much better.
Yeah. But that's good. That's a very, very helpful point here. Sure, that is good. Okay, back to Jacques. Consequently, he says the history of humanity is not in vain. Now he's saying the meaning of the city, because he will say that this history of failure that is exemplified in the city, that history is also in some ways vindicated and redeemed. It's not just human beings that go with a sort of blank, slate for the future. Human beings go to the future with their past, and with some things in their past that was worthwhile. I'll try to illustrate and read this statement first. Consequently, the history of humanity is not in vain, annulled by a stroke of the pen, as if nothing of our efforts, our suffering, our hopes had ever resisted. On the contrary, all is gathered up. Then man is saved with his works. Paradise is not a formless cloud, a rose and blue fog and a non-place. It is a good city, a solid place where the whole creation of man is recreated. I think he is onto something there. I really do think he is onto something. This disembodied, this dematerialized, this sort of amnesia, what is that? This sort of, you have forgotten everything, that is not how it is. That the lives we lived here were worthwhile lives, and there was something in these lives worth taking along, worth preserving. We couldn't preserve it. God preserved it. That's the sort of connotation here. Yes, Dave. Oh, you had a, yes, comment, please.
Well, I like to think that in the beginning God wanted to live in his people, and eventually he let them build a sanctuary to be a repository. Sanctuary is a safe place that keeps the truth of God for the people to learn it from. And then Jesus comes and tells us that we are the temple of God. We are to learn his truth and be a safe place to keep the truth alive. And in this new city, there doesn't need to be a temple because everyone there will be a repository of God's truth.
Very good. I think you have thought about these things and the sort of inadequacy of sanctuaries to mediate theology is something that has been talked about here on campus well through the years. And so here is a statement that I will read from my own commentary, and it plays directly off Jacques Ellul. Can this be true? In the world to come, must not Bach be supplanted by more melodious music? Michelangelo by paintings more exquisite? Milton by poetry more sublime? Or Einstein by superior insights into the workings of the physical world? This is my question. Will there not be buildings more splendid than the Mesquita, which I think is the most beautiful house of worship in the world? Buildings more splendid than the Mesquita, the great mosque in Cordoba that sought to blur the line of demarcation between secular and sacred space. Perhaps, or probably, or even certainly, what is to come will be better. But Ellul's perception that all is gathered up should not be dismissed. That's my, I wish to make that suggestion, as it were, that these things were worthwhile, and I would, all is gathered up. In Ellul's view, God does not annul history and the work of man, but on the contrary, assumes it. And I think this is the outside of a famous building that many of you have seen, and maybe this is the inside, is it? I've never been on the inside of this building. I have been on the inside of the Tchaikovsky house in Moscow. Amazing stuff. I'm privileged, as some of you are too, to be a friend to Herbert Blomstedt, the Swedish conductor, and who's still conducting. He's just been in San Francisco, and we were attending his birthday celebration in Sweden when he turned 90. And I gave a short speech for some of people in our community, some of his friends in the Adventist community, and I said that he has an advantage over us because in the world to come, he can just go on doing what he's doing. And all of us, many of the rest of us will have to have serious vocational training. And I told him I had my sights on a thing that I should become accomplished enough on an instrument that I would be able to play in his orchestra. So that's what I thought. Do I think he will sometimes be tempted to perform Beethoven in the world to come? I would not be surprised. And he might be tempted to perform some other things too. It is not all wasted, what was done in this world. And the notion of a city at the end as a place of culture and communion and community is not bad. There is a successful way of that. Was there a hand here? Yes, JC.
I'm fine with getting rid of the temple. It makes perfect sense. But why keep the wall? Or is that for next week?
Well, the gates are open day and night. There is no night there. It's a sort of, it is a, cities had walls. It's hard to maybe that just exceeded the powers of representation, that you cannot think of a city without walls. So you have to you make the walls and you make them, not defeat the image you're trying to do.
In the context of the walls, when we look at the description of what happens in the final battle, even though the doors are wide open, the lost decide to break the walls down instead. And of course that doesn't work out so well.
Yeah, so there is, yes, there is, that might be something worth taking. There is a wall that, and there is a battle outside the city that we should talk about, but we won't because there is no time for that. Yes, please.
I just wanted to say that if Ellen White says that the study of salvation will go on throughout eternity, tell me we're not going to sing the Messiah. I think we will.
Why not? Yeah, no, sure. And so I say in my thing, I say surely there will be something better. Yes, perhaps I say no. I say probably no. Certainly, But I will also say that some things of the skills that one developed, the human being that we became, there must be some use for it to use it as we go on. And so let's read here. We will skip this one. This is the silencing of the city in the chapter that talks about the fall of Babylon. The trumpeters and the flutists fall silent. The millstone falls silent. No more noise, no more light, no more life. There is a dead city here, a failed city, as it were. And here we see that other city, and let's read that. The price for getting to read this one is only $50. You can't afford this.
No, I can afford this one. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters, like the sound of loud thunder. And the sound that I heard was like harpists harping on their harps. And I saw those who had won the war standing on the sea of glass, having the harps of God.
Yeah, it is kind of odd. So here is my translation. This is very literal. I heard harpists playing on their harps. That's what you say in English. But the words in Greek are the same word, the noun and the verb. And so the harpists are harping on their harps, and to harp is not exactly a positive word in English. But you get the idea. There is playing on these instruments. That is a positive word in biblical thought. So that is how it was. So two images toward the end here, Old Testament images, and you can read the text faster than I can read it. These are selections from that portion of the book of Psalms called the Songs of Ascent. Songs of Ascent. There are 12, 13 songs like that, where presumably these were songs that the Israelites would sing as they walked across the land and, heading to Jerusalem, heading to the city. So all of them are very positive. All of them are very reflective, very evocative, very easy to resonate to. That's inside Israel. That's, city as gathering place for the original believing community. This text, and many like it in the prophets, are texts about the city as gathering place for the nations. That not only will the Israelites go toward the city, but the world will also go there. And many people shall come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways and that we may walk in his paths." For both of these disparate communities, the city is a kind of focus, a gathering place. You can see that. And then we have the city as bride, and the ending of the story as a wedding. And that is a sort of value-added thing, because in the Garden of Eden, who gets married to whom? In the Garden of Eden, Adam gets married to Eve, And so how how is God in that relation? God is a little more peripheral. There is a suggestion of the primacy for the human relationship, isn't there? The relationship between man and woman, between the spouses. The spousal relationship is primary. Now, so in the end, there is so in the end, aside from my text here, in the end here, there is primacy for, not for the human relations, but for the relationship between humans and God. And you can play on that idea, you know, because that vision, first of all, that there is primacy, that the most intimate relationship in life, and maybe the most fulfilling relationship in life, should be the relationship between the human beings and God. That is a step up from what it is today. That's a different story. You know, we live all in various ways in relationships where there is some sense of emotional primacy, relational primacy for the relationship to other human beings. That is mysticism. To take it up to that level is a kind of mystic idea, it seems to me. It's also, you can play off that idea, the city as bride, that there is primacy for love rather than for sex. There is primacy for love rather than for gender. So you can see if that works, if I'm claiming too much, or if it is fair for me to claim those kinds of ideas for the world to come. There is definitely primacy for the relationship between human beings and God, that human beings are the bride, and God, or the Lamb, is the bridegroom. I thought of this in the end here. This is Dostoevsky who says about the wedding in Cana, that the meaning of the miracle of God, Christ making water into wine. Why did he do that? Because that seems like a very low priority miracle, you know. Can't he do something serious? And then Alyosha's mentor in the Brothers Karamazov, he says to Alyosha that Jesus came not to minister to man's grief, but to man's joy. You know, that is sort of orientation. And if that, of the whole thing is for that kind of orientation, and if that is true, then the notion of a wedding, the notion of bride and bridegroom in the end, is also in some ways enriching our understanding of the name, of what God's name, what God is like fundamentally. So our time is just about up, and I won't be able to play the Leonard Cohen song, but I will read it, and you can find it on the internet. The song is called Going Home. And God speaks to Leonard Cohen. I love to speak with Leonard. He's a sportsman and a shepherd. He's a lazy bastard living in a suit. Kind of like me. Kind of like some of you. You know, we're not good for much, you know. But, you know, we can be used for something. There is a role for everyone. But he does, God says about Cohen, but he does say what I tell him, even though it isn't welcome. He just doesn't have the freedom to refuse, you know. But you tell them what I tell you, you know. This is what God tells Cohen to say. He will speak these words of wisdom like a sage, a man of vision, though he knows he's really nothing but the brief elaboration of a tube. You know, he's only a spokesperson. He's not a thinking person, you know. He's just conveying a message. He is unworthy of it, and he could not have invented it himself. This is the message. Going home without my sorrow. Going home sometime tomorrow. Going home to where it's better than before. And that is a biblical idea, that the end is better than the beginning. That is biblical. Going home without my burden, going home behind the curtain. Going home without the costume that I wore.
To our benediction. The Lord bless you, keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you, and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you,